Hello, my name's Tim Nash, and I'm a WordPress security expert, and I'm here at WPLDN on Halloween to do scary security stories. Hello, everyone. This time of year, everybody wants a scary story. So I thought I'd give you a non-scary story, because in security, we have no scary stories. It's just not possible. So once upon a time, because that's how all good stories should start, obviously. This clicker will work for me. Once upon a time, there was an agency, a store, and a hacker. And normally I call them bad actors, but we're going to call them hackers tonight because it rhymes better. The agency had built this website. It was marvelous. Worked and everything. Unlike most people's sites. The client had filled it with lots of things, and they launched to much fanfare. They sent out a press release on PR Web and everything. And Googlebot came to visit. Obviously, nobody else did. This is a brand new site. You've got to spend money and stuff. So they came to visit. The orders started to come in, thick and fast. Soon, things were not quite going as well as they'd hoped. You can tell they're looking really sad. Have you ever had one of those feelings? Something is wrong, but you can't quite put your finger on it. For the store owner and the agency, there was this feeling. Something was wrong on the site. They knew something was wrong on the site, but they couldn't pin down the problem. They went through making sure all the plugins were up to date, setting up a security plugin, running malware scans, and making a few test transactions. Everything came back fine. But it wasn't fine, was it? Because I wouldn't be doing a scary security story on Halloween if it was fine. No, their site was compromised. This is their story. They first noticed something when the email started to bounce. They started getting spam reports. Worse, they'd been put on an email block list. Sounds really quite delightful. I'd like to be put on an email block list, to be honest. Sales had started to drop. And while they initially thought that the change in payment gateways that they'd implemented was one of the reasons, something still felt low. The number of visitors going into the sales flow were at a similar level to before. Most damning, there was a customer, and they complained that their card details had been stolen. Quite a thing to be told. And they knew it was done after making a purchase from the store. Because, people claim they do this all the time. Something was, though, wrong. So, they did what all of you in the room would do. They panicked. No. You would all never do that. You would start to investigate. You'd start to dig. Right from the start, there were some curious things. One thing that jumped out when they looked at this. Big, long list. Oh, have I got a laser pointer on this? That's it. My night's over. Ding. A file called index.py. Someone said it over there. A Python script. If you don't know, Python is just another programming language. It's like PHP, but it's not normally really used in a CGI interface. You can, but you can. So it's a bit weird that that's there. And then on a hunch, they looked at the HT access. Whoops. On the hunch, they looked at the HT access, and which allows you to modify how Apache behaves. Nothing looked out of the ordinary, though. So then, because they were on the server, there's the proper agency and everything. They knew how to use WP-CLI, so they ran it. And they ran verify checksums against the core. All fine. They ran verify checksums against the plugins. All fine. So they continued to do a review, which included grabbing plugin information, theme information. A couple of things stood out for them. WP SMTP Pro being one. They knew the domain is being blocked for spam on some servers, so the presence of the SMTP Pro might mean the site had been compromised. Maybe the email credentials is being stored in there. Maybe that could have been gained in some way. All the plugins were up to date. All the plugins were up to date. They were up to date. You saw it on the back there. When that was put to the developers, though, they had a few guilty looks. Just because they were up to date when they looked then, when asked, so, when did you update last? They went, a few minutes ago. Okay. When did you update last before that last? And those guilty look even worse. And that's when they realised maybe they'd only just updated when the client was looking. So going through the access logs, they're quite noisy, but it's clear that there is a bunch of attempts at looking at endpoints. They could be just a bot probing, but it looked like there was at least one valid endpoint with this index.php, blah, blah, blah. Now, when they went to curl that session and hit that endpoint, it came up with a 404. Not a surprise, really. It's PK and then some gobbledygook. That's clearly just some bot trying it. They had this nagging feeling. They went back through the logs. That 404 for other requests have been 200. That's really weird. Why would that happen? So they did what every good developer does. They hired me. No, they did not hire me. Well, they should have done. That would have been much more smarter. No, they did what every good developer does. They Googled. Worst idea ever. I'm so much better than Google. Sadly, in this case, I could prove this because Google came back with nothing. There was no useful results, and it was getting late. Do you know how I know it was getting late? Fine. They ordered pizza from a leading pizza specialist. Because it was late, they'd ordered pizza, and they feared it was going to be a late night. So they probably ordered more pizza. But then it happened. They were fiddling around with WooCommerce, and all of a sudden, they realized there's some JavaScript loading. That JavaScript wasn't loading there before. That literally wasn't loading there before. They were sure of it. They had a screen, they had another screen, and on one screen some JavaScript was loading, and on the other screen it wasn't. So this is pure chance. But they got to see the card skimmer. Do you all know what a card skimmer is? Is there anybody? Yeah. There's mainly not. For those of you who don't know what a card skimmer is, in this case, it's a piece of JavaScript that when you put in your credit card details, you're thinking you're putting them into a nice safe place. The card skimmer takes your card details and posts it somewhere else. Not a good place. It's posting it to a bad place, just to be absolutely clear, because, you might have thought, oh, that's nice. They're storing the card details for future transactions. No, a card skimmer is storing it for somebody else's future transactions. So they see this card skimmer. It's there, it's taking a copy of the card details, and then it sends and stores the data for the hacker to harvest. In this instance, it was actually storing those details as an image. So it was putting it in the image in the uploads folder. And then the bad actor could just make a request to the image. And then they could just grab the details out, because it wasn't really an image. It was just saved with .png at the end. And then when you opened it up, it was just a text file with the card details. This, by the way, is a really bad data protection issue. Don't store your card details this way. Bad hackers. So now they confirm that the customer's original comment, their card had legitimately been stolen from that site. And the customer was a victim of credit card fraud. Imagine having that email where you have to explain, yeah, sorry, we took the mickey out of you. It turns out you were right. Oh. So the card visiting site, they also explain the drop in sales because the credit card people were just skimming it off and breaking the form, so they were never completing the payments through. And just to make it even more fun, several anti-malware tools were now flagging the page as unsafe. This isn't a good place to be at this point. Once you're being flagged by malware tools, it's a long road to recovery. However, we have many unanswered questions. Not least, how did it just randomly appear? The card skimmer file is loading from the root of the site. Oh, there. I am really behind. There we go. Card skimmer is loading from the root of the site. So they are basically, you've got this, if you're loading in from SSH, you could see that there was now a new file created 7 minutes earlier. Something else caught their eye. You remember that index.py file? Well, that index.py file was empty when they looked earlier. Now, that had size, and it had code in it. But they checked. There were no, SSH sessions. They looked in their access logs. They couldn't see anything happening in the access log. No bot had hit any endpoints. So, how did this come in? Well, inside the Python code, there was a mini command and control script. It trawls through the JP content themes folder, and it adds into the function.php file a WordPress-Enqueue, which then adds the card skimmer code. Okay, we now know how the card skimmer code got there. Not great, but it had that in the Python script. It also had a separate function to remove it. So you could make two calls, one to add it, one to remove it. But that doesn't explain how the Python script got executed, bearing in mind that Python is not something that you just randomly fire off on a web server. You don't run it from a web server. You normally run it from the command line. But no one's logged in from the command line, so what is going on? Who created the file? The hacker seems to be a very curious type. The person has enough knowledge to put a card skimmer on a very specific payment gateway, yet not enough knowledge to know which theme was active, because they just blasely added it to everything just in case. This doesn't sound like a script kiddie. It doesn't even sound like someone who's at any sort of basic level, and it also starting to feel rather targeted. Someone hacking together maybe multiple exploits? Maybe they're just getting lucky. This is also where our agency's luck ran out and where I really wish I could know what the next slide was. So that my luck has ran out as well, because I don't have any clue what the next slide looks like to know if I'm ahead or behind. We are ahead. Okay, good. This is where our agency's luck really did run out, because as they were reading the Python code, one dev had the Python code open, the other dev goes to read the Python code and opens a blank file. The dev who had the Python code open probably was using Vim, so hit some random button combination and accidentally closed their file open. They closed their file. This one had opened their file. Now they both have no file. They've just got memory to try and memorize what was there. This is not great. The senior dev who had exited his text editor realized pretty much immediately, oh yeah, that would have been bad, because now I have no idea of looking at this code. And the evidence of the hack literally vanished. Gone. It was just an empty Python file. So we've probably jumped to conclusions, not least because I've shown you the slide at least twice now because I forgot what it was. We clearly know there is some sort of automated approach. And they were quite smart. They did realize, hang on a minute, if something is automated and it's running in a schedule, there's got to be something that can do this for me. Oh, yeah. Then it's system crons. These are different to WordPress, like crons and schedule things. These ones work reliably. You write a cron job and it just runs and puts some code in. Sure enough, when they looked for their user, there was 2 entries in there. So there were 3 entries in there. There were, for the www user, had 3 separate cron jobs. The first made a remote request to a URL on a remote system, which used the format index.php, then PK, then the random set, much like the thing we saw earlier. But this is connecting not to our site. What over there? Interesting. Could that server be the one that's acting as a code repository for our malware? Maybe. The request when the returned request came in, and it's piped directly into index.py. So you had curl request, the pipe symbol going straight into index.py. So it's basically writing it into index.py, which allowed it then to be executed, which was what the second cron request did. It ran. And then the third cron request ran with an extra parameter. So the first cron ran saying, hey, index.py, run your code. That code then ran and it filled in every theme's functions.php and then queued that JavaScript. Then the third one came along and it ran and it wiped them out. Do you think you'd have spotted that? How long would it have taken you to realize how stressed? Well, actually, we know how stressed they were eating pizza and late at night. They were clearly stressed because no developer has ever eaten pizza in the history of mankind. The dev copied the URL into the cron, from the cron, and then made the same request and got nothing back. Nothing came back. Nothing came back ever again. The next time the cron ran, the file they waited for it, willing to have their site hacked again, so they could get hold of the code, so they could work out what was going on. And the cron never ran. Now, I want you to think about that for a second. Our hacker was smart enough to realize that if something gets ran at a certain point out of sequence, that means someone has probably found it and discovered it. So they shut down that server, shut down that part of the botnet, and carried on. I mean, it could have been a coincidence. They could have hit that endpoint and everything suddenly stopped coincidentally. But I don't think we've really got to the bottom of the mystery. So they carry around poking. They grab a list of admin users. Now, I don't know about you. I think one of those looks suspicious. Two roles? That's greedy. Now, if you look over here, I've redacted the surname for privacy reasons. Because I'm obviously very cautious about it. But this first name, last name, that's a WooCommerce user. So they've registered as a WooCommerce user. This has nothing to do with WooCommerce. WooCommerce isn't vulnerable in any way. Well, isn't vulnerable for this hack purposes in any way. But it just gave them a way to register an account. Once they'd registered an account, they managed to get some sort of escalation privilege to get to the administrator, to add their administrator role. However, to make it a little bit harder, they also kept a customer role. So on first glance, you might not notice. I mean, by default, WordPress admin area doesn't show multiple roles well. It does now show them, which is more than it used to, so yes. But in Davey CLI, it becomes blatantly obvious. Hang on, this has got 2 users. Looking at the date, they appear to be created in early April. This slide doesn't look like that. Let's move away so no one notices. But that's clearly not early April. April, yeah. Are they looking at their hacker? Well, yes, they're looking at the hacker. But are they looking at the hacker? How did this happen? And why does the site owner qualify for maybe some of the most unluckiest people in history? I mean, partly because they're a story and they're scary stories on Halloween, but I think what we actually need to do is go back to March. They launched their site, and they intended to launch the site on authorized.net. But in March, they actually launched on WooCommerce Payments, which was brand new and shiny and all sorts of wonderful things. But they moved to authorized.net. However, because our tale started in March, back when WooCommerce Payments fixed a vulnerability, so they did have a vulnerability in their plugin, which was patched and left out really quickly. But they were in the process of migrating to a different payment gateway, so they delayed doing the update just a little bit. Just a little bit. Now, to be fair, I should point out this is actually based on a genuine true story. I've obviously added a few bits, but actually everything that's happened in this has happened. Probably should have prefaced that. I want to make this all much more scary rather than this is just Tim made up stuff. No, this is a real story. So back in March, they dumped over. They have to be unlucky because I don't think that the vulnerability was publicly announced till after they moved to authorized.net. Meaning that someone had worked out how to exploit the WooCommerce payment implementation. There might have been like a day overlap between the announcement and being pushed. So they really do suffer from the worst luck. But the WooCommerce payments gateway basically fixed a vulnerability that allowed you to, anyone can set a header in their HTTP request and pretend to be a given user. Which was not great, let's be honest. The vulnerability was really serious. You could see it actively being exploited, but everybody worked really hard to stop that really quickly. There really was the tiniest of windows that this could have happened in. And what happened is hackers would then give themselves administrator accounts and install web shells. We've seen this. A web shell creates like an interface on your site. It allows you to run commands on the command line, not necessarily through the web. It didn't, however, allow them to do too much, except being able to edit the cron. Being able to edit the cron then allowed them to actually run commands on the server itself, not in the web shell, therefore not in PHP. They can now edit and run things through that, and that's why they loaded the Python script rather than necessarily a PHP file, because that Python script was unbound by the PHP FPM processors. It's also because most people would have been looking for Python scripts. Most of your vulnerability checkers would have been looking for Python scripts. And actually, we ran the WP checksum. It didn't come back saying, hey, that Python script's weird. Why is it in there? Because the checksum's not looking for Python scripts. It's looking for weird PHP stuff. Things like WordFence and all of those sort of programs, they wouldn't spot it because they're not looking for something like that. They're looking for malicious things that will run in the web. Which is fine. They're allowed to do that. So, unbeknownst to the agency and the site owners, they've been caught up in this vulnerability mid-payment gateways. The hacker had somehow managed to upgrade their account. They created and gained just enough access to get this shell, which then got the cron job. Back then, the hacker was actually using the Python script for something completely different. Remember when I was talking about they were having problems with emails? Well, it turns out that the hacker was using the Python script to extract data and information. Basically, they got the SMTP details and were using it to spam out stuff. They were happy with that. These were not like genius hackers. But then the site changed its payment gateway to one that was vulnerable to a code. And while I'm saying they're not genius, you can't blame them for being opportunist. Hey, do we want to do Viagra spamming? Or make some real dumb go? I'm going to make some real money. So that's where they put the card skimmer. With all the things, obviously now it is time to clean up the site. They took no chances. They went through the whole process. They changed all the username passwords. They force reinstalled all the plugins, went through and removed a bunch of files from the WP uploads folder and cleaned out those crons. Well, You don't all look convinced by this. Yeah, there were nagging questions. Who was the hacker? Because I don't think their name was Bushra.redacted. And why was this so elaborate? Could this be, and I want to emphasize this would be rare, could this be a rare case of a manual hack? Or at least the hacker having some manual involvement? The ad hoc nature of the scripts, the pivoting of the attack, the fact that things were covered up to avoid detection. Now, I want to be clear. 99 point, and I can add as many nines as I like to the end of this, and it won't make a difference, of attacks against WordPress sites are fully automated. No one is coming after your sites. You are not important enough. Your sites are not interesting. If you have an interesting site, you will know about this, and you can be smug. Don't tell anybody else, because they're going to start asking questions, and you probably don't want to answer those questions as to what that site is. Very few sites on the web legitimately get targeted for attacks specifically on them. Obviously, it happens. Obviously, in certain industries, it happens more. If you are going to run campaign-based websites, yes. If you work for government agencies, sure. If your site is being targeted by a specific campaign group, yes. These sort of things do attract certain targets. But overwhelmingly, the vast majority of attacks on the web are fully automated. No one is paying attention to what's happening. No one is even looking. When your site is hacked and your life is falling to bits, there isn't someone going, hey, I've got you now. It's fully automated. And worse, it's fully automated by a person in a business who probably went home half an hour ago to their family, who are making good money and don't care. So, could this be one of those rare cases? It doesn't feel targeted. This wasn't someone out to ruin the client. That leads you to another interesting question. Is this a dry run? Are we actually seeing a proto-develop? That goes from we've had the worst luck, the sort of goodish luck, really, really bad luck, really lucky? Are we now seeing something new? Sometimes in hacks, we don't have the answer. Our site owners and the agency survived. Everything was fine. It was fine. No, it wasn't. 2 days later, the agency went to check, and they went and checked the site. They'd added looking for crons to the list of things to do, as will all of you now. When you go and do reviews of sites, you're going to start looking at cron jobs. It's going to be really in your minds tomorrow to go look at this, yes? So what was there? 1, 2, 3 crons. Same hack had returned. Different command and control URL, but the same hack. Have they missed the backdoor? When the hackers compromise the site, they like to add different ways in. Gain access. So if their original exploit's gone, that's all right, we'll get a new one. In this case, our hacker had hidden a backdoor. But where? They had WordFence installed. We saw it. They ran the scan. They went through and verified all the plugins were up to date. They went through and reinstalled everything again. Yeah, a few days later, same problem. This is probably irritating them now. I imagine you would all be irritated at this point. You're probably using different words. I'm only allowed to say irritated. You can insert your own short expletive words in there. By this point, Google was starting to show the malware warnings in their search engine results. This is the end of the road for your site. You might as well give up and go home and develop. No, it's not true. You can get out of Google's malware, but it isn't good. It's now going to take serious time to fix. You have to go talk to Google. Have you ever tried talking to Google? Not a great experience. Wouldn't recommend. talk to ChatGPT. It says nice things back to you instead. The client had no choice. It's time to switch off the store. Within a couple of hours, the site had reopened. Only now it was serving pills, not the beautiful items they were previously selling. The agency, understandably, were quite distraught. They'd never had a persistent hack like this. I mean, I'm not even going to talk about what the client was thinking about, but the agency was upset. They felt toyed with. The client's livelihoods were being destroyed in front of their eyes. And they, powerless, every time they stopped it, bing, 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 came back. So, obviously, this is the point where I would join the story. They still hadn't got the hang of this. So we have to rely on somebody else. Desperate, though, they got everybody working on it. And their junior dev came on and she spotted something. Wow. If it's bored at this point, just leave. That's a weird thing to put in your alarm. A single file. So the junior dev came in and she spotted something, a single file. And she asked a very obvious question. What's this file? WAF.php. And the devs who round her was like, it's nothing. She's like, well, what is it? Like, well, that file's like for our WAF system. It basically goes in PHP pre-append. What's PHP pre-append? Well, it runs before anything else runs. Now, there's a few chuckles and murmurs as people have started to realize what's happening. Yeah, that WAF runs before anything else runs. It also just sits there doing whatever. And it's read-only. Now, it doesn't show it clearly on here. It's also immutable. That means it can't be removed. Every time you try to remove that, it's going to say, hey, you don't have permission to remove that. You have to remove the attribute to remove it first before you delete it. Every time they've been wiping this site down, one file has stayed there and they hadn't noticed. A file called WAS. What the most innocent thing on the world? Who doesn't want a good firewall that stays there? Guess what? Inside the WAF is a web shell. We all knew that. I didn't need to do that quite so much. The WAF. So basically, how that WAF works is it works with several plugins. I'm going to say how it works for WordFence because it's the one most of you will have seen. WordFence has exactly the same thing built in. They have a single file, and part of that file gets loaded with a pre-append, and at the top of that file, it has a line that says, if you have any previous pre-appends, add it here. Important. WordFence now can't scan that file and compare its checksum because it doesn't know if that file is valid anymore because it was allowed to add stuff in, making it the perfect place to put malware. Because where else would you put malware but in your security plugin? This is not, just to be clear, this is not just a WordFence problem. This is any plugin that at any point allows you to edit or modify a single line of its code. It's just ironic that it happens to happen in this case. So the web shell gets popped in every time. The shell has been disguised so it could look like any WordPress page. Because how you got to that shell was you put in question mark the equals 6.23, which was the current version of WordPress. So as far as you were concerned, any page that came in saying index slash and WordPress version, are you going to notice that? No. But when you get to that URL, it actually popped open a web shell. Because the file had been set to read-only, Backdoor just remained. Popped it back. Just sitting there. Worse, the file contents, can actually be gone through. Security plugin can't check this file. The code. The malware set a 404 header. So while a hacker's hitting the endpoint and seeing the web shell, it's still loading. You in your logs are seeing 404. So you're not even looking, and you're looking through your logs and go, well, that's just bots hitting an endpoint. It's not important. And you know, when we were doing that curl earlier, and we were curling, we used -i, which gets us our headers. We didn't go to the page. We just looked at the header and saw 404, so it must mean it's not there. But could have been there. We just never saw it because we never went to it because we just assumed that because it's in a 404, applications can send headers, and it can send status headers. You can send a 200, a 500, a 503, a 404. That doesn't reflect what's loaded on the page, necessarily. Just sitting there, content's varied. It is genuinely the near perfect place to put malware. So, what is the moral of our story? No, oh, please don't take that as the moral to your story. Yeah, after you. I love that as an answer, which is much better than my answer. But I like your answer better. We should go with that answer. Use it, a developer. No, seriously. It's always, 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 always keep things up to date. That original hack that started this whole chain was simply about not updating. Complicated things I've told you about, like, built on each other, started on the foundation that we just needed to keep things up to date. It doesn't really matter how a vulnerability comes to be. They happen. We make mistakes. We all make mistakes. You should never look at a plugin and go, I hate that plugin because they didn't do something because there's a problem in this one. It's just about keeping things up to date. And it's the same for nearly all hack sites. When we start looking through, we can look for these complicated things, but ultimately, nearly all hack sites have one thing in common, and it's because we haven't been doing updates up there. I'm not going to run around the room throwing chairs and going, oh, I'm doing a developer things. But the sun sets on our age. Our site owners were victorious. A hacker has been vanquished. But for how long? This, you'd think, would be the end of the story. We're there. We are there, by the way. But we need to start thinking about this. So, there are a few things that are still digging into me. This is probably just a me thing. Because, this story makes no sense. Who was the crazy hacker? And if they had this really cool exploit, why are they not doing the super duper things with Python? Why are they just being mean? Also, why didn't they remove all the files and rebuild the entire site on a separate new hosting? Seriously, why would they not do that? You've been hacked multiple times, so you're going to stay with the same hosting on the same container. No, you go to build a new thing. By the way, if you're thinking, oh, no, why would we do this? No, you go to build a new thing. Also, the hacker, why did they leave the admin account lying around? So we're going to ask the question, did any of this really happen? So if you haven't, I didn't introduce myself at the start. So my name's Tim Nash. I'm a WordPress security consultant. And this has mostly been a real story. I did tweak a couple of details for narrative purposes. For starters, I've been joking all the way through. They should have brought me in. They did. Much earlier than you might have thought. I was brought in when the client started to notice the drop in sales and the agency realized something weird was going on. The payment gateway, the migration, the Python scripts, and all of that is indeed true. Where I took a little bit of license was that very last part. You see, on that day, we did do a full rebuild. Therefore, that WAF file never came across. We exported the content on a fresh site. We imported the content, new themes, new plugins, etc., and the hack just stopped. We never really did get that much further along with the strange hacker. I did contact the site with the command and control URL, but by the time their hosting company looked at it, it was gone. I don't know if the hacker had cleaned it up or if it was just automated and disappeared. Nor do I know why the hacker left user account. It was genuinely the sloppiest thing in this hack, because it gave us a little bit of a clue as to where to start digging. But they did. And honestly, people make mistakes. And they ultimately, hacks are well automated, still have people in them. These are not necessarily great coders. These are often people who are hacking together different scripts. The next part, the security plugin vulnerability, it happened to this client. But everything I described in it is true and has happened in a previous hack, so I just merged them in to make it more fun for you lot. And because really, we have to give them some bad luck. So it is the perfect place to hide malware. I used it to demonstrate that once the hack had happened, backdoors persist and persist. So if you take one thing from this, please. I know you are hesitant to update e-commerce sites. I know you fear breakage. But leaving updates is no longer an option. Bear in mind, this happened in a tiniest of windows. Bad luck, sure. Bad luck can strike every one of you. Bad luck will strike every one of you. Let's hope it's happening because of a hack and not being hit by a... You have to be in the room. It's a really good joke. So, leaving updates is not good. I hope this tale has left you a little fearful. But I want you to take heart in knowing that had they kept their site up to date, none of this would have happened. I'm also pleased to say that they have had their best sales month to date immediately afterwards. And the next month, they got their second best sales month. So the worst thing that can happen to you is you get hacked and make more money. That's a terrible way to leave this story. Oh well, thanks for listening.